So the Trump Justice Department can't seem to get out of its own way when it comes to the Luigi Mangione federal death penalty case that they want to bring. I've said this before, but query why they don't just let the state take care of it. They got to jump in there and, get their moment in the sun. But I think the question for us to think about is what happens when you have a U.S. DOJ and President of the United States more interested in cosplaying mob movies or action movies rather than actually running a professional prosecution. The incompetence is now jeopardizing their federal death penalty case that they want to bring against Luigi Mangione, the accused killer of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Is the incompetence of Trump's DOJ catching up to them in a big way? Let's break it down. And in particular, let's look at how the analysis here might also apply to the new MAGA obsession with the charges being brought against the accused murderer of Charlie Kirk. But let me first remind you, hit that subscription button and help make us the biggest and best, or already the best, but maybe not the biggest channel that does legal analysis and politics as well. So let's take a look at the court order here that says DOJ has a bit of explaining to do. The Justice Department has been ordered by the federal judge overseeing the Mangione case that they need to give some sworn statements about what the hell happened and why they violated the court's earlier order saying don't make statements that would prejudice the trial. The court referenced a local criminal rule for the Southern District of New York and Eastern District of New York. And just as by way of explanation, besides the federal rules of criminal procedure, besides statutes and laws, the different federal jurisdictions, like state courts, will have their own set of particular local rules that will apply to those courts. And this particular rule, which we'll put up for you, says that certain things are prohibited. One of the things that's prohibited is, quote, statements concerning the following subject matters presumptively involve a substantial likelihood that their public dissemination will interfere with a fair trial or otherwise prejudice the due administration of justice within the meaning of this rule. Here's an example. Subsection 7. Any opinion as to the accused's guilt or innocence or as to the merits of the case or the evidence in the case, meaning an opinion that you put out into the public. Gee, was this met in this case? Well, the federal judge said two high-level Justice Department employees may have violated the order limiting public opinions about the prosecution of the accused killer of Mangione because they reposted President Donald Trump's statements about the case on X. The Judge Garnett, ordered the department to respond by basically within a week, explain how these violations happened, and said if there are further violations of her order, that it could result in sanctions, fines, contempt of court, or actions specific to the case. She also said she was going to separately consider Trump's comments when she considers the motion which will be challenging the prosecutor's decision to seek the death penalty. DOJ spokesperson didn't comment. So Mangione's lawyers are what brought this to the judge's attention. And the issue is that there are reposts of a clip of Trump's interview on Fox News when he stated about Mangione that, quote, Mangione shot someone in the back as clear as you're looking at me. A White House-related account posted a clip of that interview. Then it gets reposted by DOJ's Public Affairs Unit, who works directly for Attorney General Bondi, and not content with reposting it. Remember how we always say on social media, reposting isn't endorsement? Well, they add to it, quote, POTUS is absolutely right. Then the next day, that same post was reposted by the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Attorney General. Mangione's lawyers also raised a whole bunch of statements by White House officials, including the press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, who referred to Mangione as, quote, a left-wing assassin, quote unquote, and Deputy White House Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller, who said on Fox News that Mangione is, quote, anti-fascist, unquote. So the judge is going to consider these statements when she weighs Mangione's motion challenging the death penalty and seeking to dismiss the indictment, Mangione's lawyers argue that this public perp walk, which you remember that both Mayor Adams and I think maybe Kash Patel showed up for it as well, that they violated his constitutional rights. Now, a brief point on the perp walk issue. There are lots of perp walks that are done. They're considered kind of crass things to do. Actually, Rudy Giuliani really started doing that when he was arresting mob people. He really wanted to make that statement, that we're not treating these folks with any particular deference. The argument that it violates the constitutional rights really goes to the undue publicity issue. That by itself here, I don't think would have much traction here. But when you combine it with these other statements, which frankly are outrageous statements to make, they certainly are not helping the case any, even though they might be red meat to the MAGA base, or somebody is red meat too. When you combine those together, I think there is a real concern here. Also, let's have some more quotes while we're at it. Stephen Miller also told Fox News that executive who was murdered, the victim, had been, quote, brutally gunned down by a so-called anti-fascist and was being celebrated by, quote, communist revolutionaries. So, based on all these things, Mangione's lawyers, led by Karen Friedman Agnifilo, full disclosure, she's one of my fellow commentators and a really excellent lawyer, they complained to the judge, the team did, that these had indelibly prejudiced, quote unquote, Mr. Mangione by baselessly linking him to unrelated violent events, left-wing extremist groups, despite there being no connection or affiliation. Keep in mind, that's not what he's charged with, right? He's not being charged with being part of some terrorist cell or something. He's charged with, quite simply, a brutal murder. That's what he's charged with. And what happened here was they also pointed out, this is where the Charlie Kirk thing becomes relevant, that now in this atmosphere, the murder of Charlie Kirk had only increased this kind of prejudicial rhetoric that's going on. And the lawyers specifically said that these efforts to connect Mangione with these incidents, paint him as a, quote, left-wing violent extremist, they're false, they're prejudicial, and they are part of a greater political narrative, has no place in any criminal case, especially one where the death penalty is at stake. This rush to conflate Kirk by the DOJ, these crass attempts to conflate Kirk with this murder case, these crass attempts to fire up the base over the murders of Thompson and Kirk as if they are done by some left-wing conspiracy. This is all a facade. I mean, I posted about this, but this talk, particularly by MAGA, of, quote, tone down the rhetoric, it's kind of just code for don't criticize Trump, right? Of course, there should be no rhetoric inciting violence. Why would anybody support that? And there are laws about that. You can't go around telling people to kill someone, threaten to kill them. That's a different issue. But this whole thing about toning down the rhetoric, it's also a crass attempt to make MAGAs look kind-hearted and peace-loving. And look, maybe most of them are, okay? But it's a false flag to claim in this rhetoric that prejudges guilt and innocence of wanting just in the name of suppressing criticism. Comedy, it's all a distraction. But these kinds of distractions, these sorts of rhetoric that are thrown around have consequences. And while we watch DOJ and Trump act recklessly with no regard for criminal rules, no regard for the effect on the trial or the defendant, one of those consequences will be miscarriages of justice, unfair trials, and convictions that may get thrown out. Those are both injustices. Defendants need to have fair trials, and killers should be held accountable. Best way to do that? Let professionals do the investigation and the prosecutions and make them act professionally, not like politicians shouting about things. So we'll keep an eye on this, and we'll talk to you soon.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.